I never thought the worst moment of my life would come with someone clutching pearls, like we were in some twisted soap opera. I was sitting there, still in black from the funeral, at a long, polished mahogany table in my uncle's law office. The air was stale, like old paper and secrets. Vivien, my father's wife, his second wife, sat across from me, her back straight, lips pressed tight in that perfect little smug smile she always wore like jewelry. The lawyer, my Uncle Martin, was reading the will. His voice was flat, emotionless like he'd done this 1,000 times, but I only heard fragments, words like estate, primary beneficiary, transferred assets. Each time he said her name, Vivien Brooks, something inside me twisted tighter. Our house, my father's business, the silver cufflinks he wore to my high school graduation, even the baby grand piano in the corner of our living room, the one my mom used to play before cancer took her away. All of it. Hers. I didn't even blink. I couldn't. My body had gone cold, like my blood stopped moving. My hands were folded in my lap, and I remember gripping the edge of my black dress so tightly my knuckles turned white. Vivien's hand flew to her chest as the last asset was named. She clutched her pearls so dramatically, I almost laughed. But nothing about this was funny. Her fingers curled tightly around the necklace, and she turned her head toward me with this look. Not pity, not kindness, just satisfaction, like she had won some kind of prize. Then she leaned toward me, just slightly, and whispered low enough that only I could hear. "You weren't really his child anyway." The words were like ice water down my spine. My ears rang, my mouth went dry. I could hear my own heartbeat louder than anything else in that room. Did she just... I blinked at her, frozen. My stomach dropped so hard it made me nauseous. Was she lying? Or was that the truth? Had my entire life been fake? I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab something, anything, and demand answers. But I sat there. Number betrayed. My mind was racing in 1,000 directions, but my body wouldn't move. Why would she say that? Why now? Would my father know? I glanced at Uncle Martin. His eyes flicked to mine for just a second, but he looked away almost immediately. His face was unreadable, but I caught the hesitation. The flicker of something... discomfort? Guilt? Behind him, the wall clock ticked. Tick, tick, tick. It was so loud all of a sudden, each second scraping across my nerves. Vivien turned away, calm and collected, like she hadn't just dropped a bomb in my lap. Her perfectly manicured hands smoothed down her skirt, and she crossed her legs with grace that made my skin crawl. I should have said something. I should have screamed, "You're lying," or "How dare you?" But the words were stuck in my throat, choking me. And then I remembered. The envelope in my bag, the sealed DNA test, and the second will, dated just days before my father died. It was like a match had been struck inside me, cutting through the fog of shock. I took a slow breath. My fingers reached down under the table, brushing the leather strap of my bag. Not yet, I told myself. Let her talk, let her feel safe. She had no idea what I was holding, but in just a few minutes, everything would change. And her face, that smug little smile, it wouldn't be there anymore. Before that moment, before the pearls, before the whisper, I honestly thought the hardest part of losing my dad was already behind me. His name was Douglas Brooks. To the world, he was a respected architect, the man behind half the buildings downtown. But to me, he was the man who made pancakes every Saturday and drove 20 minutes out of the way just to pick me up from ballet when Mom was too sick to get out of bed. He was my dad, my only parent for most of my life. My mom, Lila, died when I was 9. Ovarian cancer. It tore through her like wildfire. One day she was playing the piano in the living room, and a few months later, I was staring at a closed casket with my tiny hand in his. From that day on, it was just the two of us. He didn't always know what he was doing, and I think a part of him never stopped grieving. But he tried. He made school lunches badly, forgot picture day more than once, and rarely knew how to do a braid that didn't look like a bird's nest. But he was present. He was there. He was mine. So, yeah, when he met Vivien 4 years ago, I wasn't exactly thrilled. She was polished in a way that didn't quite fit our lives, always wearing cream-colored blouses and expensive perfume. She smiled a lot, but never at me. Not really. My dad thought she was elegant and kind. I thought she was rehearsed. Still, he seemed happy. And after everything he'd done for me, I didn't want to stand in the way, so I played nice. I clapped at the wedding, even wore the awful sage green bridesmaid dress. I gave her a chance, but I never stopped feeling like a guest in my own house after she moved in. Things shifted, slowly at first. She'd accidentally throw out things that belonged to my mom. Photos went missing. Her perfume started lingering on my dad's jackets. He spent more time at work, less time calling. I told myself it was just life, change. He deserved love again, didn't he? But the distance between us grew like a crack in a wall, small at first, then suddenly wide enough to walk through without noticing. I moved out 2 years ago and started my own life, apartment, job, friends. But I always thought, deep down, he'd be there, that he wanted to be there, until the call. A heart attack, out of nowhere. He was gone before I got to the hospital. I never got to say goodbye, never got to ask the questions I didn't know I'd been carrying. At the funeral, Vivien stood front and center in designer black, dabbing her eyes like a grieving widow from a movie. I barely spoke to her. She didn't even look at me. Everyone kept saying the same thing. He was so proud of you. He loved you so much. He talked about you all the time. But something didn't sit right. I felt hollow, disconnected. And then, a week later, I got a manila envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, my father's signature at the bottom, dated 2 days before he died. It said there had been a new will, and with it, a sealed envelope, a DNA test. That was the moment everything turned. That was when the questions began. Real, heavy ones. Why would he test me? What had he heard? Who had told him to doubt something so fundamental? I kept the envelope sealed for days, weeks. But now, sitting across from the woman who just told me I wasn't his daughter, I knew why he did it. He had known something was wrong. And somewhere, even in his final days, he tried to make it right. The silence after she said it, "You weren't really his child anyway," felt like a landslide in my chest. I sat frozen, staring straight ahead, trying to pretend I hadn't heard it. But I had. Every syllable echoed in my skull like a scream in an empty room. Uncle Martin cleared his throat and shuffled the remaining pages of the will, acting like nothing had happened. But I could see it. His hands weren't steady anymore. He didn't look at me. Not once. That alone made my stomach twist tighter. Vivien leaned back in her chair, crossing one leg over the other, and started examining her nails. Calm, collected. The picture of someone who thought she'd just won. She didn't need to say anything else. She'd already planted the seed, and she knew it would grow fast. And it did. I felt the questions rushing in like a storm. What if it was true? What if I wasn't really his daughter? What if that test in my bag, sealed, unopened, terrifying, confirmed it? And if I wasn't his, then what was I? The warmth drained from my limbs, replaced by a numb, sick cold. My eyes stung, but I didn't dare blink. I wouldn't let her see me fall apart. Not her, not here. Vivien always had a way of making you feel small without ever raising her voice. I used to think it was just me being paranoid, but now I could see it clearly. This was planned, or at least well practiced, like she'd been waiting for this moment. As Uncle Martin folded the will and cleared his throat, I finally moved. I sat up straighter, adjusted the hem of my coat, and let my fingers brush against the leather strap of my bag again. Just to feel it. Just to remind myself the truth was in there. But still, I hesitated, because part of me wondered, what if opening that envelope made it worse? I glanced at Grandfather Henry. He sat at the end of the table, stooped with age, his eyes watery but sharp. His cane rested against his leg. He had barely spoken since we arrived. Now he looked right at me. "Calla," he said softly, "are you all right?" That cracked something inside me. I looked at him, this man who had held me on his knee as a child, who once slipped me $20 bills with a wink and said, "Don't tell your dad." "I don't know," I said. My voice was barely there. He nodded slowly. "You're his daughter. That's all I've ever known." Vivien rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. Sentiment doesn't change facts." I turned my head slowly to her. "Facts?" I said louder than I meant to. You want to talk about facts, Vivien? Her smirk faltered. For just a second. That's when I knew she wasn't confident. She was bluffing, throwing grenades just to see where they'd land. And that was the moment something inside me snapped back into place. I wasn't just the daughter grieving her father anymore. I was the girl who knew her father, who loved him, who had proof, right there in her bag, that this woman wasn't the final word on anything. I took a breath and looked around the room, every face, every angle. Uncle Martin looked at the table. Vivien looked smug. My grandfather looked like he'd seen enough, and I knew it wasn't time to open the envelope yet. Not quite. Number I wanted her to speak more, to dig her hole just a little deeper. So I let her sit in her moment of victory while underneath the table I slowly slid the envelope into my lap. Not now, but soon. The truth was coming, and when it did, I wouldn't be the one trembling. It's strange how a single moment can change your posture, your breath, your whole sense of self. Just minutes before, I'd felt like a child again, small, powerless, like I was shrinking into that chair, into silence, like maybe if I stayed quiet long enough, none of this would be real. But now, I wasn't shrinking anymore. That envelope in my lap, it felt like fire, not burning me, but warming something I thought had gone cold, like a little pilot light coming back on, something steady. Vivien was still talking, something about how Douglas, my dad, came to terms with things before the end. Her voice had taken on this artificial sadness, the kind people use when they're performing grief instead of feeling it. I didn't respond. I just sat there, letting her monologue continue like it was theater. But inside, I was rewinding everything, piecing together the last conversation I had with my father. It was a rainy Thursday, 2 weeks before he died. I remember because he'd shown up at my apartment unannounced, dripping wet, clutching a coffee for me and nothing for himself. He looked tired, older somehow, but his eyes were softer than I'd seen in years. He sat on my couch, soaked jeans and all, and told me he'd been having doubts about everything. Not about me, he said, never about me, but about things Vivien had been saying, whispers, rumors, the way she'd pushed him to revise his will and told him to be realistic about his legacy. Then he said the words that broke me and saved me all at once. I need to know for sure. Not for me. For you. That was the day we did the test. Quietly. Privately. No one knew. He swabbed. I swabbed. I paid to have it sent off myself. He told me he'd handle the rest. And then, just like that, he was gone. I hadn't even opened the envelope when it arrived. The grief had swallowed me whole. But inside that package was something else, tucked behind the test results, folded once, with his signature at the bottom, a second will. It wasn't written in legal jargon, just typed, dated, and signed, with 2 witness names at the bottom. One of them was Uncle Martin. At first, I thought it had to be fake, wishful thinking, but it was real. Martin had notarized it himself the same day the DNA results were finalized. That version? It told a very different story. He'd left the house to me, his business to be split between me and grandfather Henry, the piano, my mother's piano, specifically to me. Vivien would get a summer cottage in Vermont, a few bonds, and a conditional trust based on future conduct. He'd seen her, finally, and he tried, maybe too late, maybe not, to make it right. So as she sat there now, spitting venom and twisting history like she was entitled to it, I decided something. I wasn't going to let her own this story. Not anymore. I glanced at Uncle Martin. He met my eyes. There was something in his expression. Quiet understanding. Maybe even guilt. But he gave me the smallest nod. I knew what it meant. He'd waited for me to be ready. So I reached into my lap and set the envelope on the table. Slowly, deliberately. Right between the polished crystal water pitcher and the untouched coffee cups. Vivien paused mid-sentence. Her eyes dropped to the envelope and her lips parted ever so slightly. I said nothing. Not yet. Let it sit there. Let the silence return. Let her stew in the moment before the storm, because everything she thought she'd won was about to slip right through her fingers. The second I laid the envelope on the table, everything changed. Vivien's eyes locked onto it like it was a snake about to strike. Her fingers curled slightly against the arm of the chair, nails pressing into the leather. She didn't speak. Not yet. But her silence was loud. Uncle Martin looked at me, really looked at me, and I could see something shift in his posture. He leaned forward, cleared his throat, and reached for the envelope slowly, as if touching it too fast might ignite something. It kind of did. "What is that?" Vivien asked, her voice sharp, brittle. The pearls around her neck shifted as she straightened, trying to maintain her composure. But there was tension in her jaw. Her fingers twitched. I didn't answer her. I looked at Martin instead. He nodded again, then opened the flap. First, the DNA test. He unfolded it carefully, his brows drawing together as he read. The silence was unbearable, thick and heavy, like it pressed against my chest with every tick of that damned office clock. Tick, tick, tick. Finally, his voice broke the silence. "It's a paternity test between Calla and Douglas." Vivien let out a sarcastic scoff. "Oh, please, now she comes up with a test. Really?" Martin didn't flinch. He turned the paper toward the table, holding it flat. 99.98% match. Douglas is her biological father. I heard the sharp inhale Vivien tried to hide. Her shoulders stiffened. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She blinked, once, twice, then laughed. It was hollow and humorless. Probably faked. You can order those online, you know. Martin didn't even look at her. He reached for the second document. I didn't need to read it again. I knew every word by heart. "This," he said calmly, "is a second will." Signed and dated the same day as the DNA results. I was one of the witnesses. Vivien jolted forward in her seat. "What? That's not possible." She reached for the paper, but Martin held it out of reach, then handed it to his assistant to make copies. "It's legal and supersedes the prior version," he continued, voice firm now. "Douglas changed his wishes based on new information." Vivien's lips trembled. Her skin went pale, like all the blood had drained from her face. The pearls around her neck suddenly looked tight, almost choking her. "This is a setup," she whispered, barely able to get the words out. "This is a betrayal. He loved me." Martin didn't respond. He didn't have to. The document spoke louder than any of us could. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just watched her unravel in slow motion. This woman who had spent the last few years trying to erase my existence, now panicking as hers crumbled. She looked at me, eyes burning. "You manipulated him." I met her gaze without blinking. Number I just let the truth speak. Vivien stood up, shaking, the chair legs screeching against the floor. She looked around the room, desperate for someone, anyone, to come to her defense. But no one did. Not Uncle Martin, not Grandfather Henry, who sat watching with quiet, proud eyes, not even her own reflection in the glass-framed photos on the wall. She stormed out without another word. Her heels clicked down the hall like a metronome marking the final beat of a song she thought she was conducting. And just like that, it was over. The room fell quiet again, the kind of quiet that doesn't ache anymore, but heals. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like years. I hadn't just defended my father's legacy. I had reclaimed my own. The funny thing about truth is that it doesn't always roar when it arrives. Sometimes it just sits quietly in the room with you, settling into your bones, letting you exhale. Finally. That's how I felt as I walked out of Uncle Martin's office that day. Not triumphant, not victorious. Just steady. Like for the first time in a long time, I was standing on ground that belonged to me. A few days later, I went back to the house. My house now. It was still exactly as I remembered. The ivy crawling up the porch railings, the loose floorboard on the third step, the scent of old wood and the faint trace of my father's aftershave lingering in the air, like he'd only just left the room. I stood in the doorway for a long time, keys in my hand, just listening to the silence. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like coming home. I walked slowly through each room, letting the memories wash over me. There was the dent in the hallway wall from the time I rollerbladed indoors and took out a coat rack, the stained carpet in the study where Dad spilled coffee during a 2 a.m. deadline, my initials carved sloppily into the back of the piano bench when I was 7 and thought it was cool, and then the piano itself, still gleaming, still in tune. I sat down on the bench and pressed a single key. The note rang out soft and clear. I hadn't played in years, but somehow my fingers still knew where to go. I started playing one of the songs my mother used to love. I could almost hear her humming along, and I cried. Not the broken, heavy sobs I'd been carrying. These tears were something else, lighter, cleansing. I wasn't just mourning anymore. I was remembering, reclaiming, and letting go. Vivien tried to reach out a week later, a single text. We need to talk. I deserve a conversation. I stared at the screen for a long moment before deleting it without replying. She didn't deserve any more of my time. My father had made his decision, twice, and I had made mine. He wasn't perfect. He doubted. He delayed. He left some things unsaid until it was nearly too late. But in the end, he chose me. Not because of a test or a paper or biology, but because of love. That's what I hold on to now. Grandfather Henry moved in with me not long after. The house was too quiet on its own, and we both needed the company. He tells me stories about my dad I never heard before, about the time he almost flunked out of college because he couldn't stop drawing buildings in his math textbooks, about how he cried when I was born, even though he denied it for years. We eat breakfast together most mornings. He calls me kiddo and slips me cash for snacks, even though I'm pushing 30. The business? I didn't keep it. It was never my dream. I sold it to someone who respected what my father built and used the money to start something of my own, a community arts program for kids. It felt right. Because legacies aren't just buildings or bank accounts. They're the quiet moments, the music still echoing through old walls, the people who stay long after the ones who tried to tear you down are gone. This isn't just a story about a will or a test. It's about holding on to your truth when everything else is trying to rewrite it. It's about family, not just by blood, but by choice. And it's about knowing who you are, even when the world tries to tell you otherwise. And if you're still here with me, thank you for listening, for holding space, for walking through this story with me. If this hit you somewhere deep, if you've ever had to fight for the truth or stand your ground when everything tried to shake it, I see you. You're not alone. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever uncovered a family secret? Or had someone try to rewrite your story? Let's talk about it below. I read every single one. If this story moved you, please give it a like. It really helps more people find it. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that truth always finds its way. If you want more real stories like this, raw, messy, powerful, subscribe to the channel and hit that bell so you never miss the next one. Until then, protect your peace, trust your gut, and remember, you know who you are. See you in the next one.